Amazing. We are live. Welcome to the Dangerous Dialogues. It's so exciting to kind of be back with our Dangerous Dialogues, chatting about wonderful topics again. We, throughout Pride Month, got to talk about all things Pride and all the things that do come with that. So it's kind of cool that we get to talk about some non-Pride stuff as well, because there's so many other topics to explore. Not that Pride Month is exclusive to Pride Month. Anyway, so today we're talking about independence and all the things that come with that. And I'm joined by three exceptional contributors here. I know them all very well, actually, this week, because I've worked with them all on various different worldly projects. But as much as I feel like I could chat them all up and make them sound amazing, I'm going to make them talk about themselves. So I'm going to shoot us straight over to Brian, who's there on my screen, but as I can see on YouTube, he's actually that way. Brian, tell us who you are, why you are, what's your deal in life?
Well, as Tom introduced, I am an exceptional person. So yeah, my name is Brian and I'm an actor, and I am Scottish. I'm here to talk about Scottish independence today. I am currently a student at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, and fun fact about me is I'm in isolation at the moment, and I'm in isolation for another 3 more days. So this is the first human contact I've had in a long time.
We appreciate that it's us that you're spending it with, Brian. Thank you. I'm going to shoot us over to Janelle now. That's so terrible. That's so terrible. I always think of you as Jangle because that's what we called you at drama school because someone spelled your name wrong once, which is really
That is fine. I am 0% offended. You can call me Jangle. My name is Janelle. Like Tom said, we were graduate school colleagues. We attended the University of Essex together. I currently reside in London. I currently am operating a nonprofit here and also helping with various productions, Car Crash. Yeah, not in isolation, thankfully, at the moment. Knock on wood. Hopefully everything works out with getting the second vaccine before anything else goes astray. So yeah, that's me.
amazing. And last, I saved you for last because I really want you to show us your view. We have the wonderful Tamara, who is all the way over in San Diego today.
Great. Hey, yes. So I am an actor and a teaching artist that resides in LA. But because it is the 4th of July, Americans take this very seriously. And we are spending a long weekend in San Diego. And if you want to see the view, there we are. I don't know. Can you see?
Don't even.
There you go. You're welcome.
I can't curse this with the same beauty. Like my view is that brick wall out there. There's a building site as well. So glorious.
And I know you, Tom, because I also went to the University of Essex in their MFA acting program, and so worked with you there.
Amazing. I should clarify, the University of Essex validate our course. And I want it to sound like we're fancier than we are. Like we went to East 15, a prestigiously wonderful acting school that was validated by the University of Essex. No shade on the University of Essex, but I guess at one point East 15 had their own independence, I guess, and then had to, whoa, he segued. They had to join up with the university, I guess, for various reasons. And I understand that for a lot of countries or for principalities, there are different reasons why you may choose to be an independent area or nation. And I guess it's really interesting to have so many different perspectives. As Tam already said, it is the 4th of July today, Independence Day for America. We have 2 Americans here, and I know sweet fuck all about Independence Day, except for the bit in the Heights where they're like, look at the fireworks. And that's my experience of what Independence Day is, and Hamilton, of course. So I know the date 1776, but I'm sure you're going to educate me wonderfully. I kind of wanted to start just throwing it to people so that I'm speaking a little bit less about to you what independence is, what that means, what it could be. So I'm gonna chuck it at the Americans first because you have independence. And I feel like Tamara's been like, no, not me. So Janelle, go on, start us off.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry, could you review just what you, so you just want to discuss what independence sort of means to me as an American?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. Like you said, Independence Day is a huge event, and as Tamara also knows, is a huge event in America every year. It has been forever, and it frankly probably will be forever, or at least for the foreseeable future. And I think it's sort of driven into the psyche of every American. It's an intricate part of our culture that we value independence so much, and we value the fact that we fought for our independence and won. I think that the meaning of independence is sort of lost on modern day Americans. We admittedly do get caught up in the fireworks and the barbecues and everything like that, and sort of get this like Murica attitude. And so I think the the definition for me is sort of skewed, because I've very much grown up in a culture where I think nationalism has overtaken patriotism a little bit.
Right.
Bear in mind, I'm coming from a Midwestern perspective, from a small town perspective, outside of a mid-sized city in the Midwest. So this has nothing to do, it's basically a whole other country when it's compared to other cities, towns, and states, especially states that are coastal on the East and West Coast. So, but yeah, from my perspective, independence has always been a huge part of our cultural identity and a huge part of who we are as a people. And we do have a very thorough understanding. I think that it's a huge part of our education, or at least it was mine growing up, to understand American history, especially world history, sorta, but mostly American history, and get a very thorough perspective as to what happened in 1776, like you said, when the Declaration of Independence was signed. We learn a lot about the Constitution, and then we learn a lot about our statewide Constitution, and then lots of other things on a statewide basis, I guess. Tamara can probably elaborate more on this. She grew up in a completely different area, I think. Oh no, Midwest. Okay.
I grew up in the Midwest as well. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you might have had a similar experience growing up. But yeah, it was very much Independence Day is on par with Thanksgiving and Christmas in terms of celebrating, and the effort that we put in is maybe not as great because the presents aren't there. But yeah, independence is the forefront of our nation's cultural identity, I'd say. Maybe not for me personally, but for the country, that's where the country is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do I need to? I suppose I should say something. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I have a lot of thoughts about. I mean, at this point, sorry, airplane. At this point, it's literally just a reason for Americans to like have a day off work and have a long weekend and go get drunk. Like that's literally what it is. But. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's so ingrained in such a weird way. Like we're Americans and we're free, and I don't even think we know what that means. And we assume so much that we're the only country, and it's like there's a lot of free countries out there, But that it makes us special, quote unquote, and it doesn't. But the reality of the situation, right, is like we colonized America and then murdered everybody that was here, and then fought back against our colonizers, and that makes us independent. And it just doesn't, I don't know, there's so much there to unpack. That independence is granted to people in America based on what you look like. So not everyone's free. I'm not, and not everyone has always been free. And it's, yeah, there's a lot to kind of say there, but I'll leave it there for now, and then we can come back to.
There is so much that we will unpack there, I'm sure. Yeah, and Brian, for you, not an American, a Scottish human.
Yes, so independence means two things to me. First is that my drama school's degrees don't get validated by the University of Essex. And second, it's self-determination. The Americans have it, and now we want it. We want, a good chunk of us want out of the British state. And to me, it means hope for the future, something better. The way I see it, the British are ruining Scotland. They've mismanaged Scotland for the last 300 years and have driven our country straight into the ground. And what I want as an independent supporter, I want to see Scotland rise above that and create a future that's free of colonialism, free of imperialism, free of racism as well, which is what the British state is going towards now. And forging Scotland's own path in the world. And when I go on Google Earth, I want to see Edinburgh with a star on it, not just the little circle thing, denoting it's just a regional city. I want to see a nice wee capital star in Edinburgh. That would look nice. That's what independence means to me.
A wee star. It's interesting kind of hearing these perspectives from thousands of miles apart, because I guess I think about this a lot when it comes to Christmas time, because I really, really hate Christmas with a seething passion. Have we never bonded over this before, Tamara? I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, I don't have the same fond feelings about Christmas that everybody does.
Wow. Okay,
I don't know that I hate it, but it's not my favorite.
This is another dangerous dialogue that we will have in December. I'm putting the pin in that now. But the reason I bring up Christmas is because to me, I am not religious, and I wouldn't actively say that I celebrate Christmas, because to me it's still a religious festival, but it's lost its meaning slightly. And I feel like that's the comparison that I'm making with what you're saying about Independence Day in America, is what we're celebrating, our freedom in this case, is maybe not so what's being celebrated. I knew I said I wouldn't ask questions, but I'm interested from both the Americans, Independence Day, about freedom. Are you free?
It just depends on what you define as freedom, right? So if the whole fight was taxation without representation, I know this cooler is really stressful.
So funny.
If the whole thing was taxation without representation, I would say it's what we do now, right? We're not sure where our taxes go. When the pandemic happened, just getting unemployment here was a nightmare. And as a self-employed person, we was having this conversation of are we entitled to it? Because we weren't at first. We had they had to step in and help people who are self-employed. But then it's the argument of we pay for that. That is our taxes. And I remember someone I know said something so stupid, and it was something oh, I just assume that once I pay my taxes, they're gone. And I'm that's not a great thing. Those taxes are supposed to be going back to help the people. And so what do you and America has this, I don't know if this is not a fact by any means, but our prison systems they house a lot of people. I think we're up there as far as incarcerated peoples. So, take it as you will. I do have to say, okay, I'm sorry, because this is interesting because we talk about how it's ingrained into our system. When I lived in England on the 4th of July, my dad goes, "Are you celebrating the 4th of July?" And I go, No, Dad, they don't. I was do you understand why we have the 4th of July? And I'm pretty sure my dad might not even know. I was you do realize we fought them for anyway. So no, we don't know. It's just it's a holiday weekend, right? So it's that's what we know at this point, and we're free.
But is that, to sort of be devil's advocate a little bit, is that freedom to be well, we don't have to remember that was the fight back. We're not in Scotland's situation where we're saying we're living the fight. it's like we are living our freedom because we get a holiday. We get to go and do that without the British being like, no, 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 not on our beaches.
Well, and so that's the thing. It's like, who are we? We're free from Britain. You know what I mean? That's true. You know.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Tamara, and it's such a strange thing because I think that despite the mad efforts as of late to prove that, well, from some Americans, to prove that we're very patriotic and to prove that we're very proud to be American, I don't think that most Americans who do speak a lot on their patriotism are I have to say, they're the ones who are, just enjoying the day off and really not caring about why this has happened or how lucky we really are. Because I feel like even though people stand up and they sing the songs about how proud they are to be American and how much they value their independence, I think it's completely taken for granted in America, because I don't think any modern day Americans could look at Scotland's situation and put themselves in Scotland's shoes. I just don't think that's possible, because we are just sitting here with beer and barbecue, like it's a free for all, and being like, oh yeah, screw Britain, ha ha, Paul Revere. And it's just really not the same. I think the magnitude, the weight of the situation is lost on modern day Americans a little bit. I think there are definitely those who really appreciate the founding fathers and all of this, but I personally recognize the danger in that, and there's also it's just a fine, weird line, and actually a mess of lines, because there's really not a need to put the founding fathers on a pedestal. I think we should value the privileges that we're given as Americans and the benefits that come with being an American citizen. There are benefits and there are great things that come with being a citizen. But like Tamara said, there are so many other countries who have their policies, procedures, and the law is so much more advanced, and their citizens have far less to worry about than American citizens do. But that leads back, it's a weird, intricate web where it's tied back into capitalism and how entrenched American society is in capitalism. And really, I don't think America's going to be able to escape this for a very long time. But it's hard, I think, for an American, because when I hear Brian talking about Scotland wanting independence, it's so hard for me to relate to that, just because that's just something that seems so foreign to me, wanting independence from Britain. That's something that's, that I can't even imagine that struggle right now, so my country is so beyond, it has no strings, no visible strings. I mean, we do have connections that if we lost them, we would be absolutely just, on the ground without them. But sure. Scotland's ties to Britain, we don't have anything like that. We don't have Britain as our overlord anymore. And so it's just really difficult for me to even wrap my mind around the struggle that Scottish people go through, especially because, forgive me if I'm wrong, but not everybody in Scotland is in support of independence. And so just that struggle at its base is foreign to me.
I think, Brian.
Yes, well, there's a lot to unpack there.
Sorry, yeah.
just staying on the topic of America right now, the funny thing is that the idea of Independence Day in America has sort of been appropriated by Americans, in the sense that only 13 colonies of the US were actually controlled by Britain, but whilst the majority of the American landmass was controlled by France and Spain, and Alaska was controlled by Russia. So, which is funny in the sense that the United States only chooses to celebrate Independence Day from just one of their colonizers and not the other three. Which gives me the idea that Americans aren't actually celebrating their independence, they're celebrating just a day off work. because Americans don't really get an awful lot of days off work because they live in a horrible society. I'm sorry, but
no, the Americans definitely agreed with you there. But
now, going off of Janelle's point, is it Elle or Janelle? What am I calling you?
You can call me either. Some people call me Elle here. Some people call me Janelle. Tom calls me Janelle, so Janelle's good.
All right. So now one only needs to look closer into America to find that America isn't controlled by it isn't controlled by an imperialistic power. They are an imperialistic power. If you take a look within America's borders, you will find independence movements. Particularly California, particularly Texas, they have their own active independence movements. I believe Louisiana has one as well. I don't quite know what it's like there because of the French population. I mean, I could be completely wrong on that, or I might be mixing that up with Quebec, whatever. But yeah, no, even if you look up north, you'll find Quebec, a very strong independence movement up there. And I believe there are some just south of the border in Mexico as well. There are a lot of independence movements. You just need to know where to find them. And some are quite fringe, like Cornwall. Actually, California is quite a fringe movement. And then you'll find more mainstream ones like Catalonia, Scotland as well. But yes, going on to Scotland and the sort of struggle we face here. The way American independence was painted is it was the Americans against the British, but actually a big part of it was Americans against other Americans.
Yeah. And
what we have here, we don't have a civil war, thankfully, in Scotland. But what we have is a civil war of ideologies. It's on one side we have people that are very for Scotland being its own state, and we have a lot of people who are very loyal to the British state, and that's what we had in the American Wars of Independence. We had a few Americans that were, or actually a few British people that were still loyal to the crown. And then, those that were loyal to George Washington. It's the same thing. And anywhere you go in the world, any independence movement, you'll find those that are still loyal to, I don't know, the occupiers, if you want to call them that, but the mainstream state, as it were. And then those that are for the separatist movements, the independence government, whatever. And how does it feel? It's like banging your head against a wall. It's like banging your head against a wall. And you can spend ages arguing about why independence will benefit your country. I'm sure many Americans back in the day did. Why the 13 colonies leaving the Kingdom of Great Britain would be better for them. But you have those that are loyal to the crown that were like, no, we have to stay loyal to the crown. They're the ones that subsidize us, and we have the same arguments today. It's Westminster that subsidizes Scotland, but that's not true. Scotland pays way more into the British coffers than we get back from the British government.
Yeah,
and it's it's about winning those arguments. But when you have people that just have a Union Jack painted over their hearts, it's very easy to win a factual argument. It's very difficult to win an ideological argument.
It's interesting you bring that up because Brian, I distinctly remember the day that there was the vote in Scotland for independence. That was the last vote, because there will be another one at some point. You and I were together that day in Aberdeen in Scotland, because we're both Scottish, and we both voted differently. I distinctly remember that being a very open conversation, and clearly, as we've heard from your kind of viewpoints already, you voted for Scottish independence. I voted to stay part of the Union of the United Kingdom. I would not personally make the same choice now, but I don't regret the choice then. I think the thing that has happened in between that has completely changed my viewpoint is Brexit. And I want to come on to Brexit because I think that's a whole different kettle of fish when it comes to what independence could and is. And we obviously have people here who lived in the UK as Brexit was coming into play. All of us were in the UK at that point. So I'm really interested because we talk about independence as quite a positive thing, but I would not see, and this is very much me painting with my own personal political opinion here, I would not see Brexit as a positive thing in any light. Go on, Tamara.
No, I was literally, before you brought that up, I was gonna, well, my first question is, for the argument against Scottish independence, do you think it's a fear thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
They're afraid of being on their own, and then I was going to bring up Brexit, because if Brexit is England's weird way, or the UK's weird way of being like, we want independence, but they should be a little afraid, like, right? Like, they're separating from a really, so it's interesting because it's like there's two sides of the coin, you know?
I think even a diehard Brexiteer at this point would tell you it's been a disaster, because it doesn't take an idiot. It really doesn't to go, financially, Brexit has cost more than we would have saved by leaving the EU. So the financial conversation is off the table as a positive. And the trade deals, they were never going to be negotiated well, because the point of having trade deals is being part of the union. Like, the union gives you those deals. So it was never to be expected that we would come out of this with wonderful trade deals with other European countries. I don't want to get too much into kind of the necessities of Brexit, even though I've just spoken about it. But I think, there are arguments for and against from every independence perspective. Way back in 1776, it's really hard to say that without going 1776, New York City. I'm sorry, really struggled not to continue going there. I'm sure I would have a rights issue at that point. But would America be? Of course, it would be a different country. But what would America be like if it was still, I guess, under rule of the Brits and the Spanish and the Russians and everyone else?
Oh gosh.
It's hard to think about, isn't it?
Well,
It's so weird to me though. It's like, we are the colonizers, right? Like,
yeah.
Yes, we gained independence from the colonizers, but we came and colonized the land, and we're now still. So it's just so, I don't know. That's a heady question for me to consider.
Yeah. Go on, Brian. You wanted to.
Are you asking if America still remained colonized? Is that what you're asking?
I guess, yeah. Had independence not been achieved, which is, I guess, at the moment a scenario that Scotland is in.
So you're saying basically, if we were a commonwealth, if we were similar to Canada, if we were under the rule of the monarch still.
Yeah.
Well, I think one needs to take a look at real life examples that are still going on. If you take a look at French Guiana, which is a department of France that's still in South America, it's one of the only, I think, is the only major overseas territory by a European power on any other continent. French Guiana isn't well run. It's it's still part of France, and people there are French. They have French passports. They still subscribe to French institutions, but it's really like poverty is high, crime is high. It's seen as a backwater of France. It's not on France's priority, and I reckon what we would see in let's take the 13 colonies, for example. I think what we would see is a lesser Britain, a lesser UK country. I reckon there would still be devolution the same way we have devolution in Scotland and Wales, Northern Ireland. But, America wouldn't be as developed as it is today. New York wouldn't look anything like it does right now. And then if we take a look at examples in the UK, take a look at Glasgow, take a look at Cardiff. They're nowhere near as developed as Manchester or London.
Yeah.
And even big cities that actually take a look at Aberdeen, massive oil producing city. Take a look at Houston, massive oil producing city. One looks a lot more richer, has benefited more from oil wealth than the other. I reckon Houston would have been to the benefit of the Spanish rather than the British, but had Texas remained in Spanish control, Houston had all its oil wealth, that would have gone straight back to Madrid. Houston would be a backwater, same way Aberdeen is a backwater. and all the oil wealth is siphoned into London. London looks like a towering metropolis full of skyscrapers, opulence everywhere you go, and Aberdeen is a rundown crap hole, basically. It's all the wealth has been stolen out of Scotland to fund London, and I reckon we would see a very similar thing in America today had it still been run by its European powers. It would, and that's what colonialism is at its heart. It's the raping of another person's land to the benefit of the occupiers. Take a look at Africa. Years and years of colonialism, and what does Africa have these days? Has nothing. They are developing. They are, they're regrowing. And yes, European powers can say, "Oh, we are giving foreign aid," but that was their wealth to begin with.
Mm-hmm. I do agree with the sentiments of a lot of what you're saying. I feel like I do have to challenge you on the Aberdeen London thought, as someone who lived in Aberdeen for a very long time and now lives in London. I feel like Aberdeen has continued to go through a lot of regeneration as a city. I think you can see the oil money still in Aberdeen, because it is a really vast, beautiful granite city. I don't disagree that obviously a lot of money, because that's just the way that it works, as you've just described, does come to the capital down here. The population of London is much more than the population of Scotland as a whole. I'm not trying to downplay, Scotland or its contributions, but there is already a lot of wealth in London, that contributes to London's vast skyscrapers. Sorry, I feel like you should get a chance to say something back there, Brian.
Yeah, the point is that Aberdeen hasn't benefited from the wealth that it should have received back in the 60s and 70s, when the oil boom was really taking hold. And that was at the time where we see mass developments down south in London, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Yes, Aberdeen has its nice parts. It does have its nice parts, but one doesn't need to drive that far from Union Street to find some of the poorest suburbs in Europe. How can supposedly one of Europe's richest cities have some of its worst areas? And I think one needs to look at places that have their independence, and are massive oil producing places, and have managed to develop incredibly well. Dubai, Dallas. What's that city in Canada? Forgotten it now. I know there's a big oil producing place in Canada, but I forgot its name. But either way, but the point is that we aren't in control of our own natural resources. And
it's on the same front. I kind of want to throw this to other people from the perspective of America, kind of talking about them as the colonizers, as the so-called overlords now, as Washington as such. America is essentially 50 countries that are like the UK in a union. And I'd be really interested to hear from both of you, Brian talked earlier about kind of California and other states looking at the possibility of independence. Is that where America's at now, that actually you have 50 different countries that are?
I would definitely agree that you can't look at America as a unified nation by any means. State law often trumps federal law on levels that are unprecedented. But at the same time, I was kind of surprised to hear anybody would even have heard outside of the states of any attempts at independence by any of the states, because we hear vaguely of this, but it's never anything that's broadcast in the mainstream media, or even not the mainstream media. Usually you just don't really hear about it. Certainly not in the Midwest, at least. Bear in mind, I am speaking from a Midwestern perspective. I have only lived in Missouri, my entire life besides London. So the things that reach the Midwest, especially small town Missouri, I don't feel like are at the same level as other places. But I would say that there are definitely, I have heard, especially in California, of although I don't know about solid ideas or even solid plans, but I know of different attempts at trying to make independence popular for the state.
Because a lot of it with California, I'm going to try to speak to it because I am by no means an expert, but I think a lot of it with California is they have their own state's laws and they don't want the federal government coming in and messing with it. Like they do different things when it comes to environmental and like car emissions and things like that. Like they have different regulations than the rest of the country. And that's just one example. But weed. So like for a long time, California, weed was legal, but on a federal standpoint, it wasn't. So what would happen is they would grow and put up the dispensaries and sell, but then the federal government would come in and raid them. And it was a very confusing, it might still happen, but I know for a while it was like a very, for business owners, because technically statewide, they were doing everything perfectly legal, but to the federal government, they didn't see it that way. So it's not that, I don't know if I agree. I do think federal law trumps state law, but it's only if the federal government comes in and enforces it. Like if they care enough to come in and enforce it. But it's so interesting because like we kind of say it as a joke. Like we want, because I think the people that are taking it very seriously are very, like what Brian said, very fringy. Like, you know what I mean? It's there's kind of like subcultural like movements, and it's kind of just, taken light of heart. But I think you're right. I think there's people that really want out. And so what that would look like.
To that thought, if like Scotland, like different states, if they do make their own laws, which clearly all of them do, if they do have their own independent ways of thinking and working, what is the case against any of them having independence?
It's I think it's part of it is a size thing. Like California is a huge state. Like we have enough resources in California where California could probably be fine, but not every state does.
I'd say also the concern for me being from Missouri, I pay pretty strict attention to abortion law and the issues surrounding that, because Missouri, for instance, has, now this is kind of veering off into another issue, but for instance, Missouri has one abortion clinic that's the state is looking to shut down. Missouri law is always looking for ways to eliminate abortion. And I know this is happening in Alabama and a couple other states as well. So I think it would be interesting if states were to gain independence, because there is a lot of liberal conservative divide within states, because liberal conservative divide does fall to different states, but it also falls between urban and rural areas. So I think that within states, there would still be a lot of the same issues, but they would be easily overruled if the state government was the highest law on the land. So for instance, if in Missouri, the state government was the highest law on the land, it would be very clear that this is a conservative nation. This is everything would go in one way.
There's no regulation. So you could be, if you're stuck in the wrong state, your rights could be taken away. Exactly. Because we're not all the same.
Well, I guess to that, certainly that kind of conservative, far right almost viewpoint is certainly not something that I think any of us here agree with. But if that is the consensus view of the people in that state, in that country, surely they have that right to enforce it. I'm not condoning that particular example, but
no, yeah, me neither. To be fair, to throw that out there, I hate that example. I would be terrified if Missouri was its own country, because the world doesn't need Missouri. So the world needs Scotland. I think that I feel ya, and from what I've heard about Scottish independence, I see where that viewpoint is formed, and I have a lot of respect for it. But sometimes in the States, I'm like, oh my God, can you imagine if if the lawmakers of Missouri were the end all be all? Man, I would just, I don't want to live there anyway ever again, but I would be like, Mom, pack your bags, you're going to New York or whatever, you know? So yeah, I think it's an interesting concept though, because it is interesting. Especially during the pandemic, we saw a lot in America of how much power states had, you know, where the federal government just was not able to handle the pandemic as a whole, not able to step into every state and enforce any federal laws, really, at least not that I saw in Missouri, where
that's a great example. They left
it was a freaking free for all.
It was, absolutely. You could go, one state would be completely different than the other, and it didn't even matter that they were right next door to each other.
Yeah. So I think it's funny because as independent as we are, we're still bound by not only state but federal law in Missouri, and it's, I guess, sort of, or in the States, I'm sorry. And I think it's even worse in Scotland, if I'm not mistaken, where it's not only do you have local law, but you are under the law of the monarch. The Britain is your
I think,
your big daddy.
I'm interested, Brian, in your kind of perspective a little bit on this, because I'm coming back up to Scotland in a week's time, and I'm working on a production there where I have to facilitate the COVID restrictions that are on that. We've opened Pandora's pandemic box, so we're going with it now. And the rules that I have here, producing shows as I have done for the last however many months while I've been able to again, totally different in Scotland and England, but ultimately we are the same country.
So you're partly right, Janelle. So in Scotland, it's different in the UK than it is in the US, where you have state law and federal law. We don't have that here. What we have is Scots law and English law. And the laws that the laws of the UK, the laws of England rather, don't affect the laws in Scotland. What does get decided on is bills and legislation to do with government. But in terms of like health, schools, education, a lot of day-to-day stuff, that is pretty solely in Scots law.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yes, the having that institution, I think brings us closer to independence, and it sort of defines us more of our own country than like Missouri is its own state. But just to quickly touch on your point, Tom, that you made earlier about the states being their own countries. I, as an outsider person, I would say probably not. Well, it depends on the state. Because some do have very strong identification with their state. The likes of Texas or California. But then you have states that were created by Congress as a way to stop other states from getting bigger. So I think Kansas is one of them. Pretty sure Montana as well. States out in the Midwest and towards like the Western Seaboard as well. These states are sort of just an extension of the US, an extension of Washington DC rather than their own state. And if you take a country like Scotland that is rooted in history, like it's one of the oldest countries in the world. And then you take a state like bloody hell, my American history is not good. One of those square-looking states that was like created back in like the 1800s. There's no comparison. These states aren't rooted in history. They were rooted. They're created to stop another state from gaining more resources and more power. So Washington can have them. I mean, I can't say to someone in Missouri, no, you shouldn't opt for independence, because that is their own right. And I personally, I would love to see the end of the United States. That's just my own personal view. I think the US is too powerful. And but as well as that, I would also like to see the end of Russia. I would also like to see the end of China. You know, an end to imperialism altogether. What was my point? My point was, yeah, I think
the world to end. I think that's where we're at the moment.
I want the world to end. I think self-determination should be sought by everyone, as you know, as a right of, you know, an individual or an individual's collective. But it really comes down to one question: how do you see yourself? Do you identify more with, you know, your occupiers, or do you identify more with, you know, your local people? I mean, I would actually be for Glasgow independence. I would probably be for Glaswegian independence. I'd probably be for London independence as well. In fact, I would probably believe
most Londoners would be for London independence. To be honest, it's nothing like the rest of England.
Pretty much, yeah. I think I do think we can I do think maybe in the future we will see independence in smaller doses. We've had it before in the past. You know, look at Germany, where people saw themselves more closely aligned with the city that they lived in the city states, rather than, you know, where Germany wasn't even a thing at the time. And I think we might see more of that in the future, possibly.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, and remembering as well, like the United States of America has only existed for a very short period of time in these last 2,000 years. I mean, we might see even more states being created, and we might even see more nations, not just states, but more nations, you know, existing in North America, and hopefully we can see more nations existing in Europe as well.
Absolutely. Something I want to kind of touch on that we've all sort of skirted around the edges of, and I appreciate that none of us are kind of from Aboriginal settlers, the original people who were in a lot of this land. I guess, well, Scotland in a sense has evolved from the people that were here originally. But, you know, I think there is a very strong case for kind of reclaiming your land ultimately. And I think it's very rich of us to talk about independence without mentioning that ultimately is that, you know, actually people have the right to own and make their own decisions of what was theirs ultimately. I think it's hard for us to say anything more on that because we, you know, I don't think we're necessarily the right people to talk about that. Yes, anyway, I really feel like before we finish, there's something that we've not touched on at all that we need to unpack. The bag is yet to be touched, which is about nationalism specifically. So I think there is a tendency for independence to be considered as a very nationalistic view. And of course it is, because it's about that self-autonomy. It's about like your nation, nationalism. But nationalism, I think, is often associated with the far right. And in Scotland's case, we have a fairly leftist party, maybe centre-left, that are the National Party. So I think it's really interesting because to me, the Scottish National Party and the British National Party, their viewpoints could not be either like further apart in their kind of thought process. So I guess my point is, at which point does patriotism, I'm patriotic about my country, I feel like it deserves this, become nationalistic? And which point is that nationalism kind of verging towards extremism?
Sorry, just real quick, I just wanted to, so if you are for Scottish independence, forgive me for my ignorance, does that does not place you in a nationalistic, people don't view that as nationalistic though.
Some don't.
Some don't.
Okay.
Okay.
Some probably would, but I don't think any of us do.
Oh, okay. No, I wouldn't. I just wondered if that was like a general mindset that was in the majority somehow.
The National Party are not a nationalist party, but I guess the name's confusing.
Yeah. Okay.
So
thank you.
With the Scottish National Party, they haven't always been centre left. As recently as the 70s, they were quite right wing. And they were quite fringe back in the days when, you know, they attracted that sort of crowd. But it wasn't until sort of recently when you know, they got pulled left by ex-Labour supporters that actually they became a party of you know, progressive politics. But yeah, just to answer that question, when does nationalism become, so when does patriotism become nationalism? Is that what you asked?
And then when does nationalism become extremism? It's a very
So-
layered question. I asked a bit too much for 10 minutes.
So there's three different parts of the spectrum. On one side, on the sort of left side, we can find the Scottish National Party. We can find the Plaid Cymru, which is the Welsh Party of Independence. We can find the Catalonian Party of Independence. You know, fairly left wing, fairly progressive. To me, this is nationalism out of necessity. It's the idea of, you know, reclaiming your identity for your region. You know, I am Scottish. I identify more with Scotland. This is me subscribing to, you know, a Scottish way of life. I want out of the British state. Same for the Welsh, same for the Catalans. But then when patriotism becomes moves further right, sort of midway on that, we'll find the likes of Quebec and Bloc Québécois up in Canada. You know, they have, yes, I'm very sympathetic to the Quebecers' cause of breaking away from Canada, but you know, but within the Quebec independence movement, there is a sort of French superiority. It's we are better than you know, the English-speaking Canadians. Like the whole point of, I mean, I don't want to say that Quebec should get its independence, because I'm not a Quebecer, but for a lot of French speakers in Canada, in Quebec, the idea that they are superior to everyone else, and that and for that to be the reason for their independence. I mean, I do think there is reasons for Quebec independence. I just don't think that is the reason they should be pursuing. I think that's when that becomes sort of nationalist in a way. But they're not. But the thing about the Bloc Québécois is that they're not entirely, like, there is elements of racism within the party, but it's not built on racism.
I mean, to put to you, without using your exact words, a chat that we had before this conversation, is there not an element of racism, to give it that name, about Scottish independence towards the English?
Possibly, but that's not what the SNP is built on. Maybe it was that once upon a time, but what we're looking at now is Scotland's self-determination. It's not about England. Yes, we will say it's about Westminster, and that's what it's about the Westminster government. It's about breaking free of that. We hate the Westminster government. We don't hate the English. But if we take a look at Canada, you could find a lot more people in the Quebec independence movement that say we hate English-speaking Canada.
Yeah.
But then we go further onto this nationalist patriot spectrum, and we take a look at the likes of, you know, the Brexit Party, the BNP, the Republicans in America.
I feel like this is the point to throw to the Americans, because you've sort of been under rule until very recently of what I would describe as an extremist, and I don't really use that term lightly, but I think that's what it was, and I think that's a very, very different experience to live in that kind of level of, well, patriotism, nationalism, maybe, but I don't know. I'm interested in your viewpoints.
I guess, well, I guess it's a fine line between nationalism and patriotism in America for some, but for others, it's a very obvious line where you're not just waving a flag on the 4th and eating barbecue, which is fine. It's you're attending a lot of rallies and standing behind someone politically who is clearly nationalistic to the extreme. So yeah, I think that is an argument in America that's happening a lot nowadays, where we are talking about the blending of nationalism and patriotism, and how much damage that is happening, and that's been done because of our nationalistic past and our current perspective. and I say our because I'm an American citizen, so I can't distance myself that far from the country because I don't think I have a right to do so, to say that it's not my personal mindset, but it's still my country that's affecting the world on a global level. So yeah. So yeah, well, I don't know, Tamara, what do you think? How could you best put this into words?
I guess I just kind of think like nationalism has turned on our own population. Because that's part of the issue, right?
Yeah.
That we are so patriotic that we want to keep America. The problem is there's then the lack of diversity. So like nationalism is turning on its own people. And that's the problem. And sometimes I wish we were less independent because like we just don't work well with others. We don't play well with others. You know what I mean? And I wish that was a lesson that America could take. Like, you know, versus like members of the EU are used to having to work together. And I think we get so much like it's right because it's American. And if it's American, it's right. And forget that we're part of a global community.
Absolutely. I think, you know, what we're describing is that these things really do have a very fine line between all of them. And there, you know, the idea of independence is incredibly exciting for countries, and it should be, because self-autonomy is something that we all deserve. But it has to be done in the right way. I think Brian phrased it really wonderfully about the idea of it's about your motives, basically, why you want to be independent. And I think once you have that independence, I love the idea of it being like playing well with others, because we are all just like kids on a playmat at the end of the day, aren't we? Playing with our world. And sometimes you got to play ball, and other times it's good to not shout. I feel like I'm telling myself this sometimes. But yeah, Brian, sorry, you really wanted to say something there.
I think when you look at nationalism, I think the bigger your country is, the worse it gets. You know, when we look at a country like America or Russia or China displaying, you know, nationalist politicians, it's all about the subjugation of the minorities within those countries. Mm-hmm. You know, America, when we have nationalist Americans, it's about, you know, subjugating the Hispanics, the African Americans, the Native Americans. We take a look at Russia, it's about you know, subjugating the ethnic Asians within its borders, the Chinese, subjugating the Tibetans, the Xinjiang, the Uyghur Muslims. It's about maintaining your superiority in the country as the majority ethnic group. And I think that's where you know, patriotism becomes ugly. The bigger your country is, and the more superior you are to other groups, that's when it gets ugly.
Absolutely, yeah. Wonderful. I want to wrap us up because we've been chatting for a whole hour, as they say in Northern Ireland. A country that we didn't really even talk very much about, who had such a huge Ireland as a whole had a very recent independence kind of situation. And again, similarly with Brexit, there's so much to talk about there. I want to, before we finish, mention that the whole idea of these dangerous dialogues, they're called dangerous, but they're really not. And I think we prove that in the conversation that we have, is that some of these are very heavy topics, and the idea of talking about independence so openly. And as you've heard, if you've been listening, you have, if you're here at this fucking point, like either that or we're just on in the background, whatever. But you know, there's different viewpoints, and I think regardless of what those viewpoints are, it's good to listen, and it's good to take it in, and it's good to process and think genuinely about these things. So I encourage anyone that is watching these to go and have their own dialogue about what things mean to them about independence, what nationalism is, etc., etc. You know, it's really exciting on the 4th of July. We get to look at the fireworks. We get to set off our amazing barbecues. We get to go to, not Miami, you're not in Miami, it's not that hot, it's San Diego, and cool things like that. But there are countries that don't have that privilege yet. And like Scotland, we haven't even talked about a country like Palestine, and I'm saying country because it is a country, and you know they're eternal struggle. So I think there's so much to unpack in this topic that we just won't have time for. So enough of me rambling. I feel like rounding up statements, and this is where I need like underscore music. Go on, Janelle. Give us your rounding up thought on independence, what we all need to keep in mind going forward, thinking about it.
Okay, fair. I think I can really only speak fairly from an American perspective. So the thing that I would say is that, well, I come from what's considered a very liberal left-wing thought process. I am oftentimes in contact, not so much now because I live in London, but throughout the majority of my life, in contact with a lot of right-wing conservative Americans. And I will say that facts, and I think this was touched upon earlier, factual arguments aren't necessarily going to win over any hearts or minds. And that there's no one good way to not feed the fire, as it were. And I think that if we want to work on taming the nationalistic mindset that is aflame within right-wing America, we'll have to find very subtle, nuanced ways to do so. And I think that's something that a lot of Americans struggle with, myself included, because nuance and subtlety are not traditionally American strong points. So when it comes to independence, I'm grateful to have the privilege of being an American citizen. I end it there because obviously I have a visa for another country and where I feel much more at home. And so I think that independence is everything that it's cracked up to be, and sometimes not what it's cracked up to be at all. And I wish that other countries that deserve it would have the opportunity, like Scotland, to actually gain independence where it's actually really needed and where it will be utilized to serve the country better.
Nice. Tam?
It's a lot of pressure. I just keep thinking there's multiple facets of independence and freedom, and well, we can celebrate one event, right, that made us quote unquote free and independent. There's other categories there as well. So I just think it's hard to define in one situation. Like, yes, technically independent of Britain or what have you, but maybe not independent in other ways as well.
Smashing stuff. Brian?
I look forward to the end of the British state, and I'll be here for it. When I moved into London, I will try and dismantle the British state from within inside London. But until then, I guess we have to keep fighting for the people up in Scotland to change their minds, and hopefully down in Wales, and since we briefly touched on Northern Ireland, try and get them to flip to the Republic. It will happen. We'll remove the British state one day.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for everyone's contributions and viewpoints, and thank you everybody that watched and listened all the way through, if you're still here with us. Have a wonderful Sunday, or whenever it is you're watching this, because, you know, you can watch things anytime now. Whoa, catch up culture. Okay, cool. Bye, everyone.